Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're stepping into the ring for what is basically a 2,000-year-old heavyweight intellectual boxing match. The topic? Why we, as human beings, are so fundamentally drawn to storytelling, drama, and art. We're diving deep into the ultimate debate between two of history's absolute greatest minds, Aristotle versus Plato. So if you've ever wondered why we're so obsessed with fiction, well, you're definitely in the right place.
I want you to just think about this question for a second. Does art corrupt us or does it cure us? Like when you binge watch a gripping TV drama, or read a thrilling novel, or even listen to a deeply sad song, what's actually happening to your brain and your morality? The stakes here are massive, really. We structure our entire cultures around entertainment and art, and these two ancient philosophers completely disagreed on whether that's a beautiful thing or a highly dangerous one.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the great philosophical clash. Look at Plato attacks the poets, and Aristotle imitation as instinct. Then we'll cover truth and creative power, catharsis, the emotional cleanse, and finally wrap up with why we need art.
Starting with Section 1, the great philosophical clash, a turning point in criticism. To really understand how we consume and talk about art today, we actually have to travel back to ancient Greece and look at Aristotle's famous work, Poetics. This document was an absolute turning point. It basically built the very foundation of classical literary criticism. It gave us the vocabulary to understand why a story works, and more importantly, why it matters.
And that brings us to the core divide we're looking at today. On the one side, we have Plato, who completely condemned art and poetry as misleading imitations. He thought they took people entirely away from the truth. In fact, he actually wanted to banish poets from his ideal state. He viewed them as a literal threat to society. But then, on the other side, we have Aristotle, who is actually his most famous student, vigorously defending it. Aristotle systematically countered his teacher's arguments to show poetry's immense benefits and its vital value in human life.
Which takes us to round 1, or section 2, Plato attacks the poets, the problem with copies. Before we can really look at Aristotle's defense, we need to understand exactly why Plato wanted to kick the artists out of town in the first place.
Well, it all comes down to this crucial concept, mimesis, which is defined as the imitation of the physical world. Plato saw art purely as mimesis. He argued that because art is just imitating things, it bypasses our logical reason and dangerously appeals straight to our human emotions. And for Plato, reason was supreme. Anything that created illusions and stirred up wild emotions that seriously threatened to corrupt the moral character of everyday citizens.
Let's move along and see how this builds into Plato's ultimate argument against art. You see, Plato believed true reality exists only in this abstract, ideal world of forms. The physical world we live in, the one we can actually see and touch, is merely a copy of those ideal forms. Therefore, art, which simply copies the physical world, is a copy of a copy. For Plato, this meant art is completely removed from the truth. It's basically a counterfeit of a counterfeit offering zero real knowledge.
Moving on to Section 3, Aristotle, imitation as instinct, the natural human drive. Here's where Aristotle steps into the ring and completely shifts the energy of this debate. Because instead of denying that art is imitation, he actually rescues the very concept of imitation itself.
What's really interesting here is how Aristotle flips Plato's negative view entirely upside down. He argues that imitation is actually a natural human instinct and the very foundation of our intellectual development. Aristotle is essentially saying, wait a minute, Plato, imitation isn't a flaw or some cheap trick. It's directly tied to our basic human survival and our intellectual growth.
I mean, think about it practically for a second. How do we learn? Via imitation. From childhood, we acquire language, we form habits, we learn physical skills, and we gather knowledge entirely by observing and imitating others. And because we acquire our most vital skills through this exact process, Aristotle proves that art, being an imitation of life, really shouldn't be viewed negatively. It's an incredibly valuable, deeply natural human activity. We're quite literally wired for it. Okay, advancing to Section 4, Truth and Creative Power, Rethinking the Artist. In this round, Aristotle completely rethinks the role of the artist, aggressively targeting Plato's claim that poetry lacks truth.
Get ready, because here is one of the most profound thoughts from ancient Greece. Aristotle says poetry is more philosophical than history. Let that sink in for a moment. Plato said poetry takes us away from truth. Aristotle says it actually brings us closer to it than recording actual history does. Why? Well, because history only records particular events, right? Like what specifically happened to one particular person on one specific day. But poetry deals with universal realities. It gives us these deep insights into human emotions, motivations, virtues, and weaknesses. It tells us not just what happened, but how humans generally behave and feel.
You can really see the stark contrast here. Plato sees poets as mere imitators, just mechanically reflecting reality like a mirror reflecting a tree. But Aristotle totally elevates them. He sees creative artists reshaping reality through imagination. They don't just passively record, they select material from life and present it in a meaningful artistic form. Through imagination, poets can present life not merely as it is, but as it could or should be.
Let's head into Section 5, Catharsis, the emotional cleanse, tragedy as therapy. If you've ever wondered why we intentionally buy tickets to watch a tragedy, or why we love crying at sad movies, this right here is the foundational reason.
The magic word here is catharsis. It's defined as the process of purifying or cleansing emotions by arousing pity and fear. Now remember, Plato is terrified of art because he thought tragedy excites wild emotions and weakens our rational control. But Aristotle completely disagrees. He argues that tragedy actually serves a highly positive psychological function.
Let's walk through this structured psychological journey together. First, as an audience, we witness the suffering of a tragic hero. This safely arouses deep feelings of pity and fear. We empathize with them. Then, by letting those feelings out in a controlled environment, we ultimately achieve emotional relief and balance. This is huge. Aristotle shows that tragedy doesn't encourage emotional excess or corrupt us. It brilliantly helps regulate and refine our human emotions. It cleanses us.
Entering our final section, Section 6, Why We Need Art, Education and Society. Ultimately, Aristotle believed literature holds an immense educational and social value that a healthy society simply cannot ignore.
The value of poetry and art is just so comprehensive. It enriches our culture, actively develops our imagination, and provides genuine pleasure. Crucially, it encourages deep reflection on human behavior and moral choices. Aristotle makes it incredibly clear. Poetry isn't merely a source of cheap entertainment. It's a profound source of knowledge and wisdom that contributes directly to our intellectual and moral development. This means poets perform vital artistic and educational functions, and they deserve an honored place in society. Definitely not the banishment that Plato demanded.
So, let's wrap this up with the ultimate summary of this ideological battle. Where Plato saw imitation as harmful and far removed from truth, Aristotle saw a natural instinct expressing universal realities. Plato feared that mere imitators would corrupt our emotions, but Aristotle proved that creative artists actually purify us through catharsis. And ultimately, Plato wanted artists excluded entirely, while Aristotle successfully defended their vital, educational place in society.
By successfully answering Plato's criticisms, Aristotle didn't just win an argument. He restored the dignity of poetry and laid the foundation for how we study literature and aesthetics today. So I leave you with this final, provocative thought. Next time you consume a piece of art, whether it's a blockbuster movie, a video game, or a best-selling novel, ask yourself, is it just a mere copy of the physical world, or is it revealing a powerful universal truth about your own life? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep feeding your curiosity, and I'll see you next time.